You won't believe what was standing at the foot of her bed at 3 in the morning, completely still, completely silent, just watching her sleep. And the worst part, she had locked every door and every window in that house before she went to bed. Tonight we have 3 paranormal stories that will make you question everything you think you know about the dark. These are not campfire tales. These are not legends. These are accounts from real people who experienced things that cannot be explained, cannot be rationalized, and cannot be forgotten. Check your room before you settle in. Make sure you are alone, because after tonight, you are going to want to be very, very sure. Story 1. The Third Floor. There is a specific kind of terror that has nothing to do with what you see. It has everything to do with what you know. You know the layout of your house. You know which floorboard creaks near the bathroom. You know the particular way your bedroom door swings open when there is a draft. You know the sounds your house makes at night, the way you know the sound of your own breathing. Unconsciously, completely, without ever having to think about it. Which means that when your house makes a sound it has never made before, some part of you knows it immediately. Some ancient, animal part of you that existed long before language or logic fires a signal straight to your spine and says, "That is wrong. Something is wrong. I have lived alone for 6 years. I am not a nervous person. I do not check under the bed. I do not sleep with a light on. I am telling you this because I need you to understand that what I am about to describe was not the product of an anxious imagination or a sleepless mind inventing shapes in the dark. I am a rational person who had a completely irrational experience, and I have spent 3 years trying to find an explanation that satisfies me. I have not found one. My apartment is on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house. 3 floors, 3 units, 1 apartment per floor. The building is old, genuinely old, the kind of old where the walls have settled into themselves and the ceilings have their own geography of cracks, and the wood has absorbed 100 years of lives lived inside it. I loved it when I moved in. I love it less now. It started the way these things always seem to start, with something small, something you dismiss, something you file away under the category of probably nothing and try to forget about. I started waking up at the same time every night, 3:13 in the morning. Every night, without exception, for 2 weeks straight, I would open my eyes in the dark of my bedroom at exactly 3:13 and lie there with that specific wide-awake clarity that feels nothing like the groggy half-consciousness of normal waking. This was sharp, alert, the kind of wakefulness that your body produces when it has perceived a threat and pulled you out of sleep to deal with it. But there was never anything there. My bedroom was always exactly as I had left it. Dark, quiet. The streetlight outside casting its familiar orange rectangle through the gap in the curtains. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound. I would lie there for 10 or 15 minutes, heart beating slightly too fast, and then eventually the alertness would fade and I would fall back asleep. And the next night at 3:13, I would open my eyes again. I started to dread going to bed. On the 16th night, I woke at 3:13, and this time something was different. The orange rectangle from the streetlight outside was not on my wall where it always was. The curtains were closed, fully closed. I sleep with them partially open because I like the ambient light from the street. I had not closed them before bed. I lay very still and looked at the curtains in the dark. They were not moving. I told myself I had closed them without remembering. I told myself I was half asleep when I went to bed and simply didn't notice. I told myself every reasonable thing I could think of while lying completely still in my bed at 3:13 in the morning with my heart beating in my throat. Then I heard the sound from the hallway. It was a soft sound, barely there at all. The kind of sound that you second-guess the moment you hear it, because it is so faint that you genuinely cannot be sure whether you heard it or imagined it. It was the sound of weight shifting on old floorboards. One slow step, then nothing, then another, coming toward my bedroom door. I could not move. I want to be honest about that because I think people assume they would react differently, that they would grab their phone or shout or do something practical and brave. I could not move a single muscle. I lay in my bed in the dark and I watched the gap under my bedroom door and I waited. The footsteps stopped directly outside. The gap under my door darkened. Not completely, just slightly. The way it darkens when something is standing on the other side blocking the hall light, except the hall light was not on. There was no light in the hallway to block. Whatever was causing that darkening under my door was doing it on its own. I stared at that dark gap for what felt like an eternity. And then, very slowly, so slowly I almost convinced myself I was imagining it, my bedroom door began to open. I screamed. Not a decision, just a sound that came out of me involuntarily, a raw animal sound of pure terror. And the door stopped. The darkness under the door disappeared. The footsteps retreated down the hallway fast, not the slow measured steps I had heard approaching, but rapid and receding. And then there was nothing. I turned on every light in my apartment and sat on my kitchen floor until sunrise. In the morning, I checked my front door. It was locked from the inside. My windows were all closed and latched. There was no way in and no way out. I have checked with my downstairs neighbors. Neither of them was awake at 3:13 that morning. Neither of them heard anything. The footsteps in my hallway came from inside a locked apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with nowhere to go and no way to get in. And my curtains have been fully closed every single morning since that night, no matter how I leave them before bed. I have stopped trying to explain it. I have started sleeping with the lights on. What do you think was standing outside my bedroom door? And what do you think it would have done if I hadn't screamed? But the darkness does not end here. The next story goes somewhere deeper, somewhere older, somewhere that will make you think very carefully about the photographs you keep in your home. Story 2. The Photograph. My grandmother died in October of 2019. I want to start there because everything that happened afterward is connected to her, and I want you to understand who she was before I tell you what she did after. She was 83 years old. She had lived in the same house in rural Pennsylvania for 60 years. A small farmhouse at the end of a long dirt road, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that always smelled like something baking, a front porch where she sat every evening regardless of the weather and watched the fields go dark. She was the kind of woman who made everything feel safe just by being present in a room. The kind of woman whose absence, when it came, left a specific shape in the air that nothing else could fill. She died in her sleep in her own bed, quietly, the way she had always done everything, without making a fuss. I inherited the farmhouse. It took me 3 months to work up the courage to go through her things, and when I finally did, I found in the drawer of her bedside table a photograph I had never seen before. It was a photograph of me, taken from outside the window of my apartment. I live 400 miles from that farmhouse. My grandmother had not visited me in 11 years, not since her health made traveling difficult. In the photograph, I am sitting at my kitchen table in my apartment, reading, unaware of being watched. The photograph is printed on regular copy paper, the kind you print from a home computer. The timestamp in the bottom corner of the image reads 3 weeks before my grandmother died. I have no explanation for how she had that photograph. I do not know who took it. I do not know how it ended up in her bedside drawer. I called every member of my family, and none of them knew anything about it. My grandmother lived alone. I brought the photograph back to my apartment and put it in a frame on my bookshelf because it was the last thing connecting me to her, and despite everything I found about it unsettling, I could not bring myself to throw it away. That was my first mistake. 2 weeks after I placed it on the shelf, I noticed the photograph had changed. Not dramatically, not in a way I could immediately prove or point to. Just a subtle wrongness, the way a familiar room feels when one object has been moved slightly and you can't immediately identify which one. I picked up the frame and looked at it closely. In the original photograph, I was alone at my kitchen table. In the photograph, as it now sat in the frame, there was a shape in the doorway behind me. Dark, indistinct, the way a person looks when they are standing in shadow just at the threshold of a room. It was not a clear figure, but it was not a shadow or a trick of the light either. Something was standing in the doorway of my kitchen, in that photograph that had not been there before. I told myself the photograph had faded unevenly. I told myself it was the light in the room playing tricks. I put the frame face down on the shelf and did not look at it for a week. When I turned it over again, the shape in the doorway was closer. It was standing directly behind my seated figure in the photograph now. Where before it had been at the threshold of the room, partially obscured, it was now immediately behind me. And though it remained indistinct and dark, I could see clearly that it had a shape. The shape of a person standing very close, looking down at the back of my head, with what appeared to be one hand slightly raised toward my shoulder. I threw the photograph away that night. I put it in the trash can on the street outside my building. I did not sleep in my apartment for 4 days. When I came back, the photograph was on my bookshelf, not in the frame, just the photograph sitting face up on the shelf where the frame had been. The trash had been collected during those 4 days. The original frame was gone, but the photograph was there. I looked at it for a long time before I picked it up. The shape was gone. The photograph showed only me, sitting at my kitchen table, reading, alone. The doorway behind me was empty. Everything was exactly as it had been in the original image. I put the photograph in a sealed envelope and mailed it to my mother. I did not tell her what had been happening. I simply asked her to keep it safe. She called me 2 days later and told me the envelope had arrived, but when she opened it, it was empty. The photograph has never turned up again. I do not know what my grandmother was trying to show me. I do not know what was standing behind me in that image. I do not know if it was a warning or a visitation or something else entirely that I do not have a name for. What I know is that my grandmother kept a photograph of me taken through my own window 3 weeks before she died. And whatever was in that photograph with me did not want to be seen. What do you think she was trying to tell me? And do you think whatever was in that photograph is still watching? One more story, the darkest one. The one that has no resolution, no explanation, and no comfort at all. Story 3. The Voice on the Baby Monitor. My daughter was 18 months old when it started. I want to be careful how I tell this story because she is 7 now and she is fine, and I need you to hold on to that while I tell you what happened in the months before she turned 2. She is fine. She does not remember any of it. She sleeps soundly in her room down the hall, and she is completely, perfectly fine. I am telling you this because I need to tell someone, and I have never told anyone the full truth of it. And I need you to understand that what I am about to describe happened to a real child in a real house, and I am her mother, and I was there for all of it. It started with the baby monitor. We had a standard audio monitor, the kind that sits on the nightstand and transmits sound from a receiver unit in the baby's room. White noise function, volume control, nothing unusual about it. We had used it since she came home from the hospital. It had never done anything strange. The first night I heard the voice, I assumed it was interference. Radio crossover, a neighbor's frequency bleeding into ours, something completely mundane and technical that I simply didn't understand. It was a low voice, speaking very softly. The words were not quite clear enough to make out, but the cadence was unmistakably that of someone speaking to a small child. Slow, patient, rhythmic. The way you speak to someone who is just learning what language is. My husband was traveling for work. I was alone in the house with my daughter. I went to her room immediately. She was asleep. The room was empty. The window was closed and locked. Nobody was there. I told myself it was interference and went back to bed. The second night, the voice was clearer. I lay in bed and listened to it coming through the monitor, and I understood for the first time that it was not speaking English. The sounds were language-shaped, structured, rhythmic, with the rise and fall of actual speech, but not in any language I recognized or have since been able to identify. And my daughter, my 18-month-old daughter who was just learning to say mama and dada and no, was responding, not in words, in sounds. The soft pre-language sounds that babies make before words arrive, those rounded, formless vocalizations that contain the music of speech before the meaning comes. She was making those sounds in the darkness of her room in direct response to whatever was speaking to her through the silence. Taking turns. The way you take turns in a conversation. I stood in the doorway of her room for a long time and listened to my daughter having a conversation with something I could not see in the darkness of her room at 2 in the morning. And I could not make myself go in. I am not proud of that. I am her mother, and I could not make myself cross the threshold of her room. Something about the quality of that exchange, the intimacy of it, the patience of it, the sense that this had been going on for some time and that my daughter was entirely comfortable and unafraid, paralyzed me completely. Eventually, her sound stopped and she slept, and the voice on the monitor faded to silence. This happened 11 more times over the following 4 months, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. Always the same unrecognizable language spoken slowly and patiently to my daughter, who always responded in kind and always fell back into a deep and peaceful sleep afterward. I had the monitor checked. I had the room checked. I had the house checked. Nothing was ever found. On the last night it happened, my daughter did something she had never done during these exchanges before. She laughed. A real laugh. A delighted baby laugh, the kind that comes from pure, uncomplicated joy. And then she said, very clearly in her small, certain voice, a single word I did not recognize. Not English, not any language I knew. 3 syllables spoken with complete confidence and familiarity, the way a child says the name of someone they love. And the voice on the monitor answered her one final time. And then it was gone. It never came back. My daughter woke the next morning, bright and happy, with no memory of any of it, and has never mentioned it in the years since. She is 7 now, and she is fearless in the dark, in a way that other children her age are not. She has never once been afraid of the night. She sleeps with her door open and her curtains open, and she has told me more than once that she likes to look at the dark, because the dark is where her friends are. I have never asked her to explain that. I am not sure I am ready to hear the answer. What do you think was speaking to my daughter in the dark? And what do you think it said to her that last night that made her laugh like that? Thank you for watching. 3 stories. 3 accounts from real people who encountered something in the dark that had no explanation, no resolution, and no comfort to offer. The woman who heard footsteps in her locked apartment, the photograph that changed, the voice that spoke to a child in a language no living person recognized. I have no answers for any of these stories, and I think that is the most terrifying thing of all. Not the darkness itself, but the fact that some things that happen in it simply cannot be explained, no matter how hard you try. If you made it to the end of this video, leave a comment right now telling me which story gave you the most chills. We read every single one. And if something has happened to you that you have never been able to explain, something you have never told anyone because you were afraid they wouldn't believe you, leave it below. You are not alone, and you are not crazy. Some things are simply real. Like and subscribe for new horror stories every single week. And tonight, before you go to sleep, do one thing for me. Check every room in your house. Make sure you are alone. Because after what you just heard, you are going to want to be absolutely